This episode is brought to you by The Skeptical Buddha, The Tao of Science, my book, which is a thoughtful discourse on Eastern philosophy and how it helped birth ideas required for science and skepticism and the way it fell behind in the face of new evidence. This book discusses the long history of both philosophies as well as the tenets and variations within the varying sects, along with psychology and our own natural biases. It discusses how to counter our natural biases using science and the underlying concepts of meditation and mindfulness, a more complex understanding of how science operates than most of the public understands, and why it is the best tool we have to discover truth and reality, as well as philosophical ideas we might embrace as technology progresses. The material is packaged in a way that the average person can understand, with rich illustrations to draw the reader in and feel at peace. Welcome to After School Democracy, the podcast that attempts to fill in the gaps you almost certainly missed in school about politics, economics, and history. The way we view economics today is considered by many just obvious, and the only way economy could work. Supply and demand decides how much something is worth based on a monetary value whose supply is created or destroyed by a central authority. I want something from a stranger who wants my money. We do a usually once-in-a-lifetime exchange, often never speaking to each other. Once exchanged, there is no further obligation to each other than the contract involved, such as a return or replacement policy. Most people's goals in life is to be debt-free with enough money to support themselves and their nuclear family in old age, and hopefully make enough to be able to give gifts and to charities they care about. That is the modern social liberal ideal, while the capitalist ideal is to make as much money as possible, invest, and build more wealth off of that investment. The only obligation a company has is to its shareholders, certainly not to its employees or the local society unless it's good marketing, so you can expect on average the more you invest, the more you will get back in a positive feedback loop. You can then start a business of your own if you like, viewed as the most virtuous thing one can do as a capitalist, and get other venture capitalists to invest into your idea. If the risk succeeds, you and all the venture capitalists make a lot of money. If you fail, both you and the venture capitalists take a loss, but because it's usually pooled and diversified, the loss for everyone is very small. In this case, once again, your obligation is only to the shareholders because you took the risk. You can glean the fruits of all labor off your employees, paying them as low as humanly possible, usually because all the other businesses are also working together to pay much less than the job is actually worth, and make your shareholders even more money by dumping as many externalities onto your local society because you owe zero obligation to them. This is just the way things are, the only way they could be, and are just natural, as the free market mimics the survival of the fittest of nature, therefore it's the perfect model. But what if it wasn't? What if this system was actually just a trickle-down cult that mimics the lived experience of our rulers and corporate overlords being isolated from the rest of us by money and power? What if what we, at least in the West, view as normal was never the lived experience of anyone until about 50 years ago beyond the nobility? But because we all bought into the cult, our mental health, trust, happiness, and economic, ecological, and political stability has begun to decline, first slowly and then rapidly, to our own potential global self-destruction. This cult or religion most of us are born into is referred to as neoliberalism. While most people, including the dictionary, view neoliberalism as an economic system, there are several videos I have linked in the bottom bar by both the cynical historian who describes it as an all-encompassing mindset to one by Wisecrack who compared neoliberalism to that of the ancient Aztec religion requiring human sacrifices to keep the sun from dying. These are good videos for understanding the problems with neoliberalism, an idea first experimented with by neo-fascist leader and butcher Augusto Pinochet that took over the Western world, eating our mindsets about exchange, starting with Thatcher and Reagan. However, just understanding the flaws in neoliberalism doesn't mean you clearly understand any alternative. Something can be awful, but if it's all you know, you can't think of any functional alternatives. For that, I am just recommending the entire channel of What is Politics and Androism. Many self-proclaimed anarchists can't explain their way out of a paper bag as to how anarchism would mechanistically and psychologically work. They just know the current system bad. That's why the concept of anarchism, for the majority of my life, just felt like a fairy dust joke that would translate into destructive anarchy if anyone tried to implement it. These anarchists I refer to as neoliberal anarchists. They have no understanding of how their system would actually function, But that's by design of the current system. So many skills needed to organize for better connection and better organization to create change to make the world better. It made every other system an immediate argument from incredulity of, I can't think of any other system, therefore this system is the only possible one. This was accomplished by making everything that used to require community engagement, planning, and organizing replaced with prepackaged single-use versions for a monetary price. Once we lost all of those organizing community skills, it was all over. We were trapped with learned helplessness against this all-encompassing, persistent system that must consume and take sacrifices of usually the poor, the global south, or useless eaters to reward those hard-working individuals who put their faith blindly into the invisible divine hand of the free market. And the funny thing is, this same mechanism is why so many were horrified at the idea of Marxist-Stalinist nations, because they were all dictatorships, and you were encouraged to rat out your neighbor or family member to the secret police. All of that social trust was utterly destroyed, severing bonds, making very cold and emotionless exchanges and interactions. It was only near the end of the Khrushchev and early Brezhnev periods that people even had a chance to try and relearn these skills, and of course, no one was talking about it, no internet at the time, and pretty much only party members and perhaps rural folk away from the secret police were able to rebuild these ties, only to have another crackdown by Andropov, first using an infirm Brezhnev as a puppet and later directly as the leader of the Soviet Union. Gorbachev was then handed a fragile, completely divided, emotionless, connectionless nation, full of poison pills given to it via Stalin, that went off like a time bomb. He probably could have done a much better way of easing the nation down, but no matter who it was, the Soviet Union was doomed to collapse, much of which was caused by the disunity that apparently neoliberalism learned from and ran with, that, if not corrected, could lead to the West collapsing just like how the Soviet Union did, where the average person felt zero obligation to each other and everything was a cold interaction between people who had reasons not to trust each other at all. Those nations lucky enough to avoid Marxist-Stalinism and instead got Marxist-Leninism, in name at least, namely Vietnam, Cuba, and perhaps Laos, were able to maintain many of their strong local ties with each other, with strong local and democratic communities and governments, even though their central government is still by all definitions a dictatorship. The Vietnamese government, in the face of rising booming capitalistic growth in the nation from outside companies, is encouraging and aiding in every trade to unionize to help protect wages and basic rights. What is Politics is a channel by an anarchist anthropologist who discusses power and interpersonal social interactions, mostly about the transitions of pre-agrarian to the agrarian, even taking on beloved anarchist anthropologist David Graeber, who in his opinion doesn't appear to understand the difference between hunter-gatherer, fishing, horticulture, partial agrarian, and hybrid cultures. Lumping any one not fully agrarian into one group and making generalizations about power structures between them all is not going to work. Everything about his channel is about power interactions, how they were abused, how situations led them to be, and how people figured out ways around it if they could. The entire channel has changed my viewpoint on the entire way social power structures work, and has made me seriously consider how to thread the needle to make sure we get something of an altruistic society. He even goes into the beginnings of the patriarchy caused by the need for patriarchality, thanks to more sedentary lifestyles. Patriarchality created strong bonds between men and weak bonds among women, creating some of the best fighters. Matriarchality created strong organizational bonds between women and weak bonds between men, which often created a more just society, but mostly survived better than patriarchality when the community was involved in long-distance trade or hunting. Patriarchality is when a tribe or village is mostly made up of related men, and women from other areas move to that location, whereas matriarchality is the opposite, where most of the women are related and the men marry from other locations. In a matrilocal society, if a man hits a woman or demands things unfairly of her, the other women are biased toward their own and gang up and isolate or punish the offending man. In a patrilocal society, if a man hits or abuses a woman, thanks to bias toward one's own in-group, they would easily rationalize why she deserved it, and since there were very weak ties between women, they couldn't organize to assert power. Add to that, because in a patrilocal society, women were now viewed as a trade and kind of a burden and much less as equal, they began investing less and less into their women in both training and nutrition because they knew the women they got from the other tribe were also going to be poorly invested in. This hurt literally everyone, but created a serious prisoner's dilemma. Neoliberalism and all dictators understand that if you can create only weak bonds between people, there is no longer enough trust to come together and challenge the authority of those in power, and we all have about the same learned helplessness against organizing that those women had. Perhaps even worse because it affects everyone, not just the women. The Haudenosaunee, or Iroquois people, who interacted with the colonizers in the early days, had many intellectual exchanges between them and were utterly baffled by the entire European system because it was so inhumane and degrading. Money in pursuit of it was inhuman, as it tore asunder bonds between people and allowed people to go without. It created exchanges based not on equal effort and dedication to each other, but equal average value based on a collectively agreed upon average. They also mocked their chosen leaders openly, with no repercussions, so they wouldn't get a big head. The idea of having an unquestioned leader stripped you of all dignity and made you a slave, something thankfully the founders were able to glean from and apply to at least the people they viewed as human through their monarchist, patriarchal, colonistic, money-driven lenses. And through it, with collective, organized, direct action, we have slowly been able to expand our world into. Adam Smith made up from whole cloth purely from assumption that people started out with barter, moved on to money, and after that debt. Economists assumed this for centuries after. In reality, from all evidence, barter is really only used when the system of money breaks down, because the chance of finding a person with something you want who wants something you have is insanely rare, especially when dealing with perishable or seasonable items. In reality, the gift economy came first. If people asked you for something, you gave it. If you received, made, caught, or grew something such as food, you divided it among everyone in the tribe. If someone asks you for something or some help, you give it because you know they will do the same for you. Much of this was because true hunter-gatherers are what is referred to as an immediate return society. If you find something to eat, you can hoard it and let it go bad, or you can immediately share it and nothing goes to waste. Also, if you don't find something one day and everyone will have an off day, you have a good chance of getting taken care of by people who were successful that day. It also creates the strongest bonds in the world. This mindset over time, thanks to agriculture and other pre-agrarian systems, soon got narrowed down to clan and then nuclear family in the European Middle Ages, and has since stuck. The further beyond that, the less likely you are to do this to others. And as neoliberalism came along, even that bonding and loyalty broke down. Neoliberalism even changes the definition of gift enough to shift it from bonding obligation to guilt-based obligation to help push sales. The neoliberal definition is a purchase of obligatory exchange reliant on surprise and based on the judgment of the giver to show they know the person well and how much they value something, which almost never matches the value the receiver places on the item. Failure to give can lead to damaged or destroyed friendships and a lot of guilt. This ensures that a ton of financial exchanges occur that the receiver does not actually value, inflating the perceived value of a good. By neoliberal definitions, it's an incredibly inefficient market exchange, but it's a great way to inflate demand for prices individuals may not actually want. Contrast with the paleo definition of a gift, which is an item or service freely given on request, knowing social and emotional pressures will ensure equivalent exchange valued by both receivers. Failure to give an equal effort can lead to damaged ties and even social expulsion. The carrot and sticks of gift giving are completely backwards when it comes to neoliberal versus paleo gifting. It takes a ton of repeated failures to return the favors when asked, and even then, so long as the person appears to put in equal effort, even if they don't produce equal results or produce equal value, because we're all different and many have disabilities, to begin to have resentment or even expulsion, since the ties are so much stronger. While it takes way less failures in gift giving, or even to guess the right gift, to lead to a loss of friendship, or even the perceived fear that it could happen, creating a ton of social and emotional anxiety that never used to exist and should be a 100% enjoyable activity. As we moved beyond the immediate return economy, we now had to deal with more seasonal availability and less immediate distribution. This led to debt. You knew your neighbor was going to help you out when their crop or whatever was available for harvest, so you basically put it on their tab in your head, especially when you had a bunch of food items that could go bad if not used quickly right now. However, as the powerful grew, they changed the definition of debt to have a very sinister, cold definition. This kind of debt is a quantified amount based on the collectivized value approximation one owes to another with interest tied to it. If one has a bad year in terms of farming, the debt just grows and grows, and interest grows until they're slaves or serfs of the other. Neoliberalism took this definition a step further, and if one can earn and save enough, they can be debt-free. This offloads all social responsibilities from individuals to each other, the less debt they have, but also shreds all social ties beyond cold, heartless financial exchanges. The rise of money or currency was also more than just a cold, hard figure. Money is useful for one-time exchanges, and people understood the value early on. As populations grew, the more money was needed to keep track of debts. And the more people that you interacted with, the weaker the social ties you had that would enforce repayment. But you still had social ties. On remote islands or chains of islands to this day, people will carry strings of beads with them to act as both a tally of debts but also a mark of social ties and trust they have forged. The more you have, the wealthier you were. The Chinese refer to this as guangxi, and you could be broke, but so long as you have guangxi, you're a rich man, as they can easily repay that social clout by putting you in jobs that will make you rich. It's actually how much of the CCP operates. People work hard to achieve guangxi and political power, and then the money flows in. In the US, it's almost the opposite. So the actual evolution of economics is gifting, debt, and money, and then if everything collapses, barter. Exactly the opposite of what Smith assumed. Neoliberalism is this evolution to its ultimate extreme from economics being about social ties and interactions to being the exact opposite extreme of cold, hard, cutthroat, heartless numbers, and this is the only way it ever has been and ever will be. If you understand how rich people live, you realize just how these people are the strongest adherents to this religion of neoliberalism, and they really truly see it as completely natural. The richer you are, the more people poorer than you will want your money, while your peers want your influence from you. Because of this, you trust no one. This ensures very few ties and little trust at all. Everything truly becomes just a cold, heartless exchange. The longer you live in this world, the more neoliberalism just seems completely natural, and they are able to trickle that down to the rest of us over time to the point that we can't think of any other way. But how exactly could we bring back something akin to Paleo-economics? Well, it would require rebuilding the sustainable community and the skills to create this to the point that you could actually fall back on them if you hit the skids. But these skills were completely wiped from our minds by neoliberalism. In the next video, I will go into further detail as to how and why this must be done to succeed and survive climate chaos. So as always, thank you all for watching this as a video or listening to this as a podcast, which I'm sure was completely uncontroversial to anyone, especially to the YouTube monetization team. So if you found this useful, please donate to my Patreon. Just a reminder that I'm Anubis 2814 on YouTube, and I have almost 700 videos on my channel that I've made over the past 11 years on religion, science, psychology, and politics. Please go check them out, and if your site has the option, like, rate, review, and comment. A special thanks goes out to Kendall Copperberg, Mylon Mia, Ogrel, Elias Garcia Guevara, and Joe Taylor for their $10 or more Wapawet level donations. I'm always humbled by the fact that they find my work worth funding and worth driving me forward. Thank you all. Please consider donating to my work if you can, and thank you all for listening.